Just to continue with what you showed us via video, I'd like to speak very briefly on why these protests that happened post the amendment in 2019 December to the Citizenship Act of 1955. Why were they so special? Just to once again bring to your notice that the 2019 amendment to the Citizenship Act provided for legalization and naturalization of the citizenship of illegal migrants from the Hindu, Christian, Jain, Parsi, Sikh, and Buddhist communities, all who were religious minorities and had fled persecution from 3 countries in the neighborhood, namely Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh. It clearly left out the Muslims, saying that they have 54 countries where they can go. We don't need them here. This is so completely sectarian and against the Indian Constitution's core principle of equality of all persons that definitely there was outraged. It conveniently ignored claims of many other refugees from other neighboring countries like Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Nepal, Mauritius, and Burma. We have a huge, I mean, not so huge, but we do have about 40,000 Rohingya refugees, other than some other, Chen refugees and others. So this came in the backdrop of the terrible suffering that happened in Assam, where the National Register of Citizens happened, and more than 19 lakh people were left out of the register, and they were termed non-citizens, non-Indians. The Muslim minority amongst them were 6 to 7 lakhs, about over 12 lakh Hindus got left out. So obviously everybody saw the trauma of what happened in Assam, and just with that kind of misery, where people talked of opening huge detention centers to throw those who were non-Indians and non-citizens, got the Muslim community and secular-minded people very agitated. And everybody knew that if you did not have the right documentation, you would have no space. So, and if in the NPR you could not prove, then you would be declared an illegal migrant. However, but if you were Hindu, Buddhist, Sikh, Jain, Christian, Parsi, in 7 years' time, you would get your citizenship in 5 years, sorry, not 7 years. But if you were Muslim, how would you prove your citizenship? And who has documentation in India? And our regular documentation also has so many problems with our spellings, with our age, with our photograph. So it was really, the most horrendous kind of problem that had come to people. I mean, it's not that the Muslims are not being persecuted, not being pushed, but somewhere being now, denied citizenship. The possibility of being denied citizenship was kind of the worst decision of this government. So, I mean, it sent a chill down everybody's spine as to what was happening. So what followed was the youth of the university in Delhi, Jamia Millia Islamia, take the lead, and they took out peaceful protests. But there were massive crackdown that happened on the students. One student even lost his eye in this crackdown. Women were beaten up. Women were being dragged by male police. They got into the masjid of the university. I mean, there was complete mayhem, and all boundaries were broken. So it's in this context of complete mayhem that the women of Shaheen Bagh, which is next door to where Jamia Millia Islamia is, they started this most spectacular protest. And it just transformed into a mass movement. It became pan-Indian. And women everywhere, it was Muslim women, mind you, Muslim women everywhere came out to sit in protests. It was literally like what we say in Rajasthan, the Jajam, the carpet of Shaheen Bagh kept being stretched in city after city, in town after town, and women in most of these cities, even small Mufasil towns, came and sat in the most stoic and peaceful day. Of course, there were lots and lots of men also around, but women had started managing. I can tell you, I traveled to so many Shaheen Bagh protests all over the countries. Women were actually managing. They would decide who could speak or not speak. Of course, the men used to be all around, but definitely there was some sort of leadership in the hands of the women. And they weren't just puppets of men, that because buses, of course, a lot of arrangements were made for transport in cities where the protests are far away, but women definitely had a lot of agency. Just in Delhi, there were 20 Shaheen Baghs. And the 12 people that we are talking about who have been incarcerated, who were they? They were the leaders of this protest. They were young. It was mostly, it's not that activists, political parties, eminent personalities, common public did not extend their support. And it was a very hard-hitting kind of protest, but it was led by women, and that was very young women. Of course, there were lots and lots of youth also. Now, it's these protests which led to so much of visibility and so much of, in one way, questioning this whole amendment, that very soon even crackdown started, for instance, in UP, in AMU, for instance, in Lucknow and in other cities of UP. When those people who sat in protest, they were booked under, public property defacing laws, and their photos were put up in central places of the city. And even some of them were even picked up and arrested, many of them, which included retired police officers and journalists and eminent citizens. Even threw them in. It took a judgment of the Allahabad High Court to bring down those banners, but they never came down. It was finally the storm that brought it down. So it was that kind of, crackdown also that had begun. But despite the crackdown, even elite students from IIT, from management institutions who generally never connect. So, it ceased to be definitely, the main body of the protest was Muslim, it was women, it was old women, young women, yet it also became a protest of all communities, all sections. And of course, just the creative way in which the songs and the slogans emerged, and graffiti and art on the roads. It was something very special, something in my career of having been on the streets for the last 40 years, I'd never seen something like that. I have been with the women's movement, but this was something very, very special. And of course, we had women like, just to give one profile, Bilkis Appa, who sat in Shaheen Bagh, over 80, she sat there and she said, we will not allow this to happen, and we will not allow this government to arrest our sons, just release all our sons who are being arrested. At that time in the crackdown of December 19th, I'm not going into the details. However, we knew that the government at some point would come out. They could not just bear, that there was so much of popularity, so much of public support. So we knew that something or the other would happen. So in the run-up to the Legislative Assembly of the Delhi state, the hate speeches began by the top BJP leaders. One of them is a minister in the Anurag Thakur in the Modi government, and the others, Kapil Mishra, for instance, they straightforward talked of genocide of Muslims, and they wanted, publicly said that, if they don't get up, we know how to, make them get up. And they not only using cuss words against Muslims, but also that they would use force and do anything. Even if there's a bloodbath, they're going to get them evicted. Instead of, restraining them, putting them behind bars, it resulted in some agitation in East Delhi, in Northeast Delhi, of the protesters, and it snowballed into a very, very organized attack on the Muslim protesters in Northeast Delhi, by different groups of, Hindu communities, and they came from outside Delhi. They were actually brought in trucks. Arms are also brought. And that resulted, as we just saw in the video, in a terrible riot. It was not just the loss of lives where 52 people were killed, but just the kind of property that was raised. And this happened just before COVID, and the camps also were not being allowed. And when this riot happened, even ambulances were not allowed. At midnight, activists had to go and wake up the judges to get an order to get the ambulance out. And of course, once this began, this is what the Delhi police, which comes under Home Minister Amit Shah, started, set forth his anti-Muslim agenda. And of course, FIRs to the tune of like 600, 700, total number of FIRs are filed. Some of the FIRs also got filed because you could only be compensated for your property if you had an FIR. However, about 150 FIRs are filed relating to criminal cases, and 50 very serious, of which FIR number 59, of which we're talking, conspiracy, a conspiracy to, somewhere pull down the government, a conspiracy to somewhere attack Modi. And this happened, they tried to use the visit of Trump. They tried to use a speech, which was one of the best speech, which is of Umar Khalid. But they had to somewhere, which I'm sure Banu will talk about, but they had to somewhere vilify the Muslims who had got so much support and popularity. And of course, it just resulted in a siege of Northeast Delhi and many other parts by the police and central forces. It also resulted in, the protests. Finally, where women were made to get up from the protests, and of course they brought the bulldozers a little later and even raised all their structures to the ground. Of course, there was also COVID, and there were COVID guidelines. However, there could have been a dialogue. There could have been all that the women were demanding. They were just not sitting there. They were demanding that talk to us. They kept telling Amit Shah, talk to us. Even in the Supreme Court, it was argued that the government is just not talking to them. However, even the Supreme Court judgment that came really did not help us. So this very unique, spectacular protest led by women, of course, ended in this bloody, and then the might of the state showed its complete might, to remove those women. But I must say that the only silver lining to it was that this whole protest actually resulted in a lot of us learning, building up. We got our confidence back. We realized that we could fight back, and of course, then it's snowballed into that much larger farmers' movement. However, the cases that they made and the large number of people, definitely those who went under the terror laws, the 12 who are, there were a total of 21. 3 were released without UAPA right in the beginning. 18 were taken under UAPA, of which 2 have got bail. It's sad that 16 still remain incarcerated, and we don't know. We just don't know when the trial will start. Actually, it's the process which is the punishment. There is no desire to start any trial ever. It's just to bring trunk loads of paper and confuse the judges. And also, although we got a very good judgment when 3 people were released, Natasha Narwal and Asif Iqbal Tanha and Devangana Kalita, whoever, I'm sure Shahrukh will talk about the jurisprudence that emerged, relating to the right to association and my right to protest, which is not anti-national. In a democracy, if I don't have the right to protest, then where is it a democracy? That, of course, is not being used enough by the courts again to get the people out. I close here that the women of India, that also Muslim women of India, so-called illiterate, backward women of India, who were in hijab and pardas, actually broke the silence of the kind of persecutions that people in India are going through. And they paved the way for what, for a while, we regained our democracy. However, today, just to before I conclude, the way the Muslims are being pushed into the background with the might of the state, mass raids, arrest to the tune of 300 to 400 PFI activists, now a ban on the PFI, the Popular Front of India. The right to association is once again thrown into the air, completely anti-constitutional ban, but the persecution of Muslims is just unending and is going to continue. However, the anti-CAA protest gives us the hope that we can fight back. The farmers' protest gives us the hope that we can fight back.